Georgia, we do know that the longest running criminal trial in the history of the state is coming to a close soon. And just for a reminder right now, this is the YSL RICO trial that initially started with 27 defendants. Let's go ahead and also pull up this tweet that we have from our partners there at Fox 5. Again, almost a year after that testimony began in this racketeering indictment against Young Thug and 27 other defendants, prosecutors did rest their case earlier this week. This means that this case is headed to being in the hands of the jury. So I do want to bring into the conversation right now legal analyst Meghann Cuniff. Meghann, thanks so much for being with us here on Live Now. We've been talking about this case for several months and watching some of the, of course, developments that have happened over the last few months, specifically Young Thug getting released from jail after he did get a plea deal. But what are we now looking to expect in the coming days?
Yes, he did. He did do an open plea. There was no agreement with prosecutors, but he did get out of jail on probation. And now we have two defendants left. Diamante Kendrick, who's a rapper under the name Yak Gotti, who's signed to Young Thug's label. And then Shannon Stillwell, who's a longtime associate of theirs, who's also an aspiring rapper. They are both charged with racketeering conspiracy and also murder. Shannon Stillwell is charged with a murder in 2022 and also 2015, whereas Diamante Kendrick is charged with the 2015 murder. And there's also various drug and gun counts. Diamante Kendrick's lawyers did score a win for him. The judge did declare him not guilty on 3 counts. There were, I think, 2 drug counts and a gun count that she ruled had not been proven sufficiently by prosecutors throughout the course of this year of testimony. But the major charges against him are going to be going to the jury after we hear closing arguments.
And this is interesting, Meghann, because, again, the last 2 remaining defendants, prosecutors did say that they both rejected plea offers after over a week of negotiation. What are your thoughts there with them facing, again, these serious charges, turning down the plea offers that the government did offer?
Yes, and the plea offers. Diamante Kendrick was looking at about 15 years served, and he'd get murder charges reduced to. Shannon Stillwell would see his murder charges reduced to manslaughter, but he was looking at about 40 years to serve. So they're rolling the dice with the jury, and I think they're really riding on the fact that the trial has been kind of a mess over the last year, and there's signs that perhaps the jurors are fatigued, et cetera, et cetera. But over the course of the year, while all these problems have been going on, prosecutors have also been entering a lot of stuff as evidence. There's going to be a lot of stuff for the jurors to sort through, especially regarding the most recent murder we've been hearing about. And I think it's going to be a tall order to expect. I think there's a lot of internet hype around this case, and I think the attorneys kind of bask in some of the support that they get online. But I think they're also aware that the jurors here are not a bunch of 25-year-olds who love rap. So we could be seeing, some interesting negotiations going on, or perhaps we do see a quick verdict. It's really hard to say. But I think after a year of testimony, we're in for a long wait here.
And not just to mention that year of testimony, several different judges as well were in charge of this case. Does that make it more complicated when a jury is looking at this, saying it's not seeming like the state, like you said, had all of their ducks in a row initially when they were trying to bring this case to trial?
Yes, I think there's so many things to factor in there. I mean, the jurors have been instructed not to think one way or the other about the change in judge. And in the end, there's going to be so much evidence back there for them to look through. It might kind of surpass all the chatter in the talk that they've heard over the last year, because it's not going to be easy to remember all the cross exams or all the discussions that they've heard, but the exhibits are all going to be right there for them. So it's going to be quite interesting to see what they do, if they're able to reach a verdict, and then if so, what it is.
And I think even more interesting as well, like you just mentioned, they're not going to be able to remember all this. Also, they had 175 witnesses that were speaking in this trial. There's impossible to, in this case, I would have to say, Meghann, seemingly to keep up with every inch of testimony that happened throughout the course of this year. Again, those opening statements began November 27th in 2023. What are your thoughts, again, what it goes on in the mind of a juror as they've been in the longest case in Georgia history, now having to make a very tough decision that will impact the lives of those two defendants?
I think a lot of it is going to come down to, what do the jurors think of it when they all talk amongst themselves? They might have formed their own opinions about the charges, but they're going to have to come up with an agreement amongst the 12 of them. And I think that could be obviously the sticking point in any kind of jury deliberations, the fact that they all have to agree. So I think that's going to be the real interesting thing, is, who is for what and who feels they have the most leverage. And one thing prosecutors have done is put a lot of exhibits and stuff back there for them to point at, whereas the defense has had a lot of cross-examinations that they would have to get readbacks from the court reporter to hear. So there's that to consider. But, there's just so many factors going on. And especially, I think, the disappearance of 4 defendants like we saw in the last month or so. I mean, it's hard to say whether that works in anyone's favor, but it also might help jurors kind of explain away the last year of the trial if they can just think that, oh, well, it was a mess because there were so many defendants involved, but then it got a lot more efficient after they left or something. It's hard to say, but I do think that we're in for a wait on this, because if they can't agree, the idea that the judge is going to let them deadlock after only 2 days of deliberation, I think that's unlikely. The judge can do what's called an Allen charge, where she tells them to keep deliberating. And I think, excuse me, I think we're going to see that.
And when you just briefly mentioned this, but I mean, of course, at the center of this trial was Young Thug. The celebrity nature of a trial like this also weighs on a jury, even though they're supposed to be impartial and they've gone through this selection process. Really, we've seen these celebrity trials in the past, and folks come out afterwards and either make books about their experiences. I just think the celebrity factor matters here. What are your thoughts on that?
It could, but I've been thinking about how the last few trials, at least that I've covered or that we've seen, I have not seen a big push by the jurors for publicity, and part of that could be just the vitriol in the tone of social media coverage of some of these trials. I think some jurors might be a little hesitant to put their feet forward. I mean, I think it depends on the verdict. If there's a not guilty verdict and there are some jurors who want to talk about how ridiculous the trial was, there's definitely going to be a receptive audience for that. So it's just going to, it just all depends on what we're going to see. But I know there's going to be a lot of people who will be interested to hear their takes on it and finally get to hear them talk after a year.
Certainly going to be something that we're keeping our eyes on this upcoming week. Again, Meghann Cuniff, legal affairs journalist, here to help us break down some of the latest information that we're getting in this Young Thug trial that has now, again, he's removed from, at this point, 2 last defendants there in the YSL case. Thanks so much for being with us here on Live Now, Meghann.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Again, we did want to just get that story in because that's going to be something that we're following into next week as we're waiting for the final deliberations to get underway. Let's step away for a 2-minute break. Stay right here with